Thank you. Thank you for staying up this late with me. Today I'm going to talk about sideloading, a little bit about Plugx. And I know what your first reaction would be. Really? Sideloading? That's ancient history. It has been discussed to death in the past. And I don't blame you, that would be my first reaction as well. In fact, almost exactly 10 years ago, but minus one day, I was talking at the Virus Bulletin conference in front of some of you about DLL sideloading and Plugx. And it is not unheard of in this industry to recycle presentations, but doing that with a 10-year-old presentation and on the same conference, that's a bold move. Fortunately, that's not the case here. Part of my job at Sophos is to investigate incidents and understand and reconstruct the infection chain that has been going on. And in the past 12 months, I ran into a couple of cases that used sideloading, but with a twist. And I found these cases particularly interesting, so I thought that I'd bring them to you. Maybe you are going to find them interesting as well. Also, already today we had a couple of presentations mentioning sideloading as a technique used in malware deployment. So it's just not me being fixated on this topic. So for those of you who have been in coma for the past 12 years, a little overview of DLL sideloading. It's relying on a backdoor feature depending on your disposition of the Windows operating system. When an executable is loaded, it has dependencies of DLL libraries, and the operating system is trying to locate these libraries. And the first place it is looking for is the same directory where the executable is running from. And only after that comes the system directory, Windows directory, all the other normal installation directories for DLL files. So a malicious attacker can place malicious DLL file right next to the executable, and the operating system will load that malicious DLL instead of the legit clean operating system or DLL file. And in particular, there are several components in a DLL sideloading scenario. The most important one is the clean loader executable, which is a trusted application. It's usually digitally signed. It should run without a user interface and should not complain if the original legit DLL file has been replaced by the malicious one. The last two are important so that the activities of the malware would go on unnoticed to the user. Optionally, there would be other dependency libraries placed next to the executable in case it has multiple dependencies, and one of them is replaced with a malicious DLL file that the attacker is using. This one usually has dummy export because when the operating system loads the DLL file, loads the executable, it will check its import table, finds the imported DLLs, and finds the imported functions from those DLLs. If those are missing, the operating system would pop up some error message, which is not desired in a silent scenario. So dummy implementations of the original exported DLLs are placed in the malicious file. And the execution of the malicious content is triggered either by loading the DLL itself or later on directly being called by the clean executable. And optionally, there could be another component, the encrypted payload that is loaded by the DLL. In some cases, the entire business logic, the entire malicious content is within the malicious DLL, the sideloaded DLL, but it is somewhat beneficial to store it in an encrypted file because it minimizes the detectable fingerprint. In that case, the system will only contain a DLL file with a simple functionality, open a file, decrypt the content, and execute the content. And also an advantage of sideloading is that all the activities, malicious activities, will appear to come from the clean, trusted executable. So the first case would be Plugx. What is Plugx? Once again, it's old history. It has been discussed to death. And I'm one of those to blame for written a couple of blogs about Plugx myself. But there was I won't even mention the major functionalities. It has been around since about 15 years. Modular remote access Trojan preferred by multiple Chinese APT groups, commonly developed by DLL sideloading. 3 years ago, Avira researchers reported that a new functionality has been added to Plugx, and that is infecting USB drives and act and work as a USB worm. And this is what we have seen just recently. The thing with USB worms is that they tend to cause localized outbreaks, meaning that when a system is infected, any USB key inserted into the system will get infected, and the organization, as the USB key travels within the organization, will get infected, and anything within walking distance will get infected easily. So localized outbreaks are possible. But infected USB drives tend to travel and hop borders. And in those cases, the worm just breaks out from the original boundaries. We believe that the initial target of this attack was Papua New Guinea and some government organizations there. But later on, it got out of control, and localized outbreaks were observed in Zimbabwe, Mongolia, and Nigeria. The sideloading part is pretty boring and usual. We have a clean loader by Avast, a malicious loader, and an encrypted payload, just the usual Plugx scenario. The interesting part is the USB infection. If you look at an infected USB, you would see only it would appear that it contains another drive within the disk, but that drive is just an illusion. It's really a Windows shortcut file having an icon of the removable drive. Actually, it will execute a file, a clean loader of the DLL sideloading components from the recycle bin directory. Looking at the recycle bin directory, you would see a handful of innocent files. This is part of how this Plugx USB worm is hiding its main content. It has a setting in desktop init which will instruct the Windows Explorer to treat this directory as a recycler directory. So instead of the physical content, Windows Explorer will show the files that has been actually deleted from that system. So you need to use a more resilient method like Windows command prompt to actually look into the directory, and you will see there are two subdirectories there. One named 1 is where the sideloading components are stored, and the other one with some randomly named files. The first one is just a file containing system information. The other two, or the rest of them, have some cryptic names. And this is where another feature of this Plugx worm comes into play, which is data exfiltration. And it has added this feature to exfiltrate from data from air-gapped networks. It collects document files from the system and stores them in the directory. The names are encoded with a simple base64 scheme. And the content is also encrypted. So whenever someone plugs in a USB disk into an infected computer, sensitive documents will be copied into the recycled directory. So should we worry about this Plugx worm? Yes, random outbreaks can happen anytime, even though the C2 server is down and it's not controlled anymore. First of all, it could come back at any point in the future. Plus, anyone connecting a USB drive to an infected system will walk away with a set of sensitive documents on that disk. Fortunately, they are in encrypted form, but the file names are easily recoverable, and this can also contain sensitive information. But more importantly, the encryption algorithm used to code the files, it's not really military-grade encryption, though some ransomware operators would argue with that. Analyzing it, it's just a simple one-byte XOR, easily reversible. So if you care about your sensitive data, you should care about this Plugx USB worm variant, even though it's not actively controlled, it's still exfiltrating data uncontrollably. Another interesting cases that I found were Trojanized installers. And we have observed several different campaigns. We believe these are executed by different threat actors, but they follow the same basic scheme. It got little coverage in the English language media and blogs and technical publications, some coverage in Chinese blogs. They are targeting online gaming and gambling users, those other campaigns. And Chinese versions of popular applications were bundled with Trojanized, with malware. And these Trojanized installers are distributed via malvertising. And during the deployment of the malware, they are using DLL sideloading to execute the payload. So how does it work? Even though we think that these campaigns were by different threat actors, the initial infection stage follows the same concept. So Google searches will lead to advertised content, advertised pages. For example, searching for Telegram download in Chinese will lead to YouTube pages. In this case, these YouTube pages promote a download site. The download site would deliver an installer package for Telegram for all the major platforms. Looking at the code, I don't think you can see it. So you have to believe me that for macOS platforms, the original installer from the App Store is downloaded from these malicious websites. For Android, it's not pointing directly to Android Store, to the Play Store, but the content is downloaded from the criminal's website, but is the same that is downloadable from Play Store. And for Windows, this is where the fun begins. And this is where the Trojanized installers come into play. So this was the general concept. Malvertising points to a fake delivery site where you can download installers. From this point on, the particular details for the different campaigns will differ, and I picked probably the most interesting ones, which we tagged Double Dragon, because it was a follow-up operation of an earlier reported Dragon Breath operation. And it was active in Far East, the Philippines, Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, China, where you would expect that the Chinese version of Telegram installer would have some popularity. After executing the installer, the Telegram application, a fully operational package will be installed. Also, a sideloading archive containing the sideloading components will be dropped on the system. And finally, the desktop shortcut is created. And this is where the initial stage of the installation stops. Looking at the desktop shortcut, it would appear that it executes the Telegram application. It's not. It's executing an obscure command line. That obscure command line will run a renamed registry component of the Windows operating system, which will load the Windows scripting engine, also from the Windows operating system. And finally, it will execute the JavaScript installer code stored in the appr.dot file. So this shortcut that's placed on the desktop, after that this will display the Telegram UI, so the decoy is complete, the user can use Telegram, but in the background, the side-loading components are dropped, and the shortcut is created in the startup directory for persistence. I think the purpose for this is to fool dynamic analysis sandboxes which should follow the installation process up to the creation of the desktop link, but would not click on the desktop link. So the actual malicious content would not be created on the system. Anyway, this Double Dragon campaign adds an interesting twist to the side loading. It uses two stages. It's not clearly two-stage side loading. So I made up this name, pride loading, because the first stage is preloading, then the second stage will be side loading, the classical side loading. The extracted components would be a clean loader, a clean dependency, libxpath.dll, an auto-update executable, the malicious loader, and finally the encrypted payload file. So let's look at the scheme, how it exactly works. The clean loader is the Excel game component from Thunder Games by Shenzhen. It is renamed to application.exe. It has an interesting feature. It has an auto-update functionality. So if it finds in the same directory an executable named Excel game update.exe, it will blindly execute it regardless of what the content of it. It doesn't do any sanity check on that. And this is what the attackers made use of. They replaced the original game updater, but not with a malicious executable. They replaced it with another clean executable, which would trigger the second stage, the real side loading stage. In this case, on this diagram, it will be an application by Baidu, which will have one of these dependencies, basic netutils DLL, replaced by a malicious loader. That malicious loader will load template.txt, which contains the encrypted payload. The loader decrypts it, loads in memory a shellcode. The shellcode decrypts the final payload, which is the server DLL component, and this is how it gets executed. So it's a two-stage method. The first stage uses preloading by placing a clean executable, replacing the game auto-update function, and the second stage will do the actual DLL side loading. So these threat actors fell in love very much in this method. So they used several different scenarios where they switched the executable placed into the game updater exe. So in this case, it was an application from Baidu. In other cases, it was Kingdom 2 Crowns game. And in the third case, it was a tool from HP. And in the three cases, obviously, they had to rename the malicious DLL because these clean executables had different dependencies, different imported DLLs, but the final payload and the encrypted payload file remained the same. The final payload contains some debug information in itself. It's a basic backdoor. Also have a bit of additional functionality. it steals the Ethereum wallet from the MetaMask browser plugin. And also it has a single export named, we have found a couple of samples which had a very, very interesting thing in it. They had a function which would drop a RAR archive, and that RAR archive would contain the full source code tree of the ghost thread, the infamous ghost thread, a popular backdoor used by Chinese APT groups. It was only present in a couple of samples, and this function was never called. So it just plays there, probably remained there from some development stage or something. I see no point why it's there, but it's an interesting fact to consider. The next thing I'm going to talk about, we just recently reported about it. It was the nitrogen campaigns. And these were also distributed via advertising, Google and Bing ads. And those led to compromised sites that delivered installers for AnyDesk, WinSCP, AnyConnect, or TreeSize. So we think that the target audience for these installers, these were not targeting already only Chinese-speaking people, but they were targeting IT professionals, hopefully working for organizations. So trying to get initial access to those organizations. And these sites delivered an ISO installer, and the final payload had class names like Nitrogen Stager, Nitro Installer, and so on. This is why we came up with the name Nitrogen for these campaigns. The actual infection process is quite complicated. So I'm just running through the basic parts of it. So the Google ad, the advertising leads to the distribution sites where an ISO installer is downloaded. The ISO installer will sideload the malicious installer DLL that will drop a couple of full Python execution packages, and also the decoy installer for the clean application that it promises to install. And after that, one of the dropped Python packages actually is a Trojanized version, which will load interpreter shells that will connect to the C2 server. And this is where the actual automated infection process stops. From this on, in a couple of cases, we could observe hands-on activities by the threat actors, where they were manually executing commands. They were downloading a third Python package, and they installed on the system, downloaded and executed Python installation scripts that at the end created an installed Cobalt Beacon components on the system. And this is where our knowledge stops. But it has been reported by trend researchers that they have observed as a follow-up to this infection ransomware being installed on the system. So we think it could be a ransomware group or an initial access broker behind these nitrogen attacks. I go into a bit of details of the more interesting steps. First is the malvertising. It's reported by Jerome Segura. If you were looking for WinSCP installer on Google, well, the advertised page would lead you to let me see if I can find it, winsccp.com website, which is almost the same as the legit downloader site. If you were following or clicking through the Google search. If not, you would be recrawled if you were a researcher and just look at the website. Anyway, if you go to the distribution side, the fake distribution side, you would download the ISO image, which would contain two files. One of them is MSI exec component, but it's not used to install an MSI installation package. Instead, it's only being used to sideload the malicious MSI DLL file, which is the nitrogen installer component. And it uses an interesting thing that I haven't seen in DLL sideloading before. It is not dummying the original exports from the MSI DLL. Instead, it uses DLL proxying by export forwarding. So normally, when you have a DLL file and that exports functionality, that would look like here a function name and the address, a memory address where the functionality is actually implemented. In these cases, the export table would contain only string references for the clean DLL and the exported function from that clean DLL. So it's just simply forwarding the function request to the original clean DLL. Apparently, it is a popular technique used in game patches and game hacks, not that I would know about that. Anyway, this MSI DLL file contains a couple of packages in the resource section, two Python packages and the legit installer. The two Python packages, one of them is a legit clean one. It is based on the CoffLoader project. And the other one is the nitrogen stager, which will load and execute the meterpreter shells. And I don't know exactly the purpose of the clean and legit package. Probably during the hands-on sessions, the attackers would like to use it for actually executing Python scripts, because the nitrogen stager modified package is not viable to execute anymore. Because they modified it, the original Python DLL has been replaced. The main function, pymain, runs the meterpreter script loader. The rest of the exports are forwarded to the renamed and copied original Python DLL file. And the payload themselves are the Python implementations of meterpreter reverse shells, TCP, TCP over SSL, HTTP, HTTPS. Interesting thing how it executes its Python script, because this package cannot execute a standalone Python file, because the pymain function has been replaced by their own function. But the DLL is still there, so they can call into the underlying Python execution functions, pyinitialize and pyrun simple string, to execute those content as strings. So this is how it goes on and executes. And I still have a minute, so since the presentation promises to talk about the Korean way, just a few words. It deserves an honorary mention, but it's not really the side loading, but it resonates well with the Trojanized installers that were used by Nitrogen. So the Trojanized installer package is dropped. The full legit application is installed on the system, but one of the DLLs, dependency DLLs, is modified to execute the manual functionality created by the threat actors. So in more detail, the clean loader exe will load the malicious loader, FFmpeg. It is an open source library. The original source has been modified to contain additional functionality in DLL main and repackaged. This additional functionality will load the encrypted payload from the end of another clean DLL 5.3 CD compiler. the decrypted content will be a shellcode which will reach out to GitHub, downloads a set of encrypted URLs, and finally, the final payload is downloaded from the URLs, which is an info stealer. And a few sentences just to wrap up. Sideloading is very much alive. Thank you very much. Just because a technique is old, it doesn't mean it's abandoned. It still works fine for the attackers, and if it works fine, it will be used. If it is not used for a couple of years, it will be rediscovered after a few years and comes back. These localized attacks aim to go under the radar of the security community because they are targeting specific language regions. It may not be observed by the security researchers as easily. And we start to see an increasing uptick of malvertising users distribution for malicious content. And we should be on the lookout of this because it presents a blind spot for us. It's not easy to track and analyze, but it's there. It is getting popularity by various different threat actor groups, and you should be on lookout of that because they are coming in. It's opening a less protected intrusion vector to your system than the usual ones. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Seppi.